So today, if we want to wrap up any business with the creeds, we can, but what I actually want to do is give you a rundown of Synod Assembly and all that went on there. Oh, perfect. First I'm going to cup of coffee though.
First things first.
Yeah.
Know that.
Not that I need an excuse to eat donuts.
But if you got an excuse, might as well use it.
Every day is a national
Every
day.
day is
So
national.
That's true, that's true.
Yeah, donuts for me are one of those things where like I'm willing to take the hit on
I know,
calories.
right?
So I don't know. Ellen is not such a donut fan. You know, she's a pastry fan. So she'll gladly consume extra calories for the sake of a good
Good
on the
pastry.
chocolate. You know. No, yeah, don't let me get started on her rant about pastry in the U.S.
Ooh.
It's mainly price. I mean, the quality isn't as good ever.
Yeah.
Actually, if you do want good French pastries, probably the best place in Portland right now is Fleur de Lis Bakery up in Hollywood area. It's up by Laura Schrader's office, so we occasionally, whenever Laura and I meet for lunch, I'm like, let's just meet at Fleur de Lis.
And I'll take some pastries home.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually got several places that do French pastries. Saint Honoré, and you guys familiar with Saint Honoré? It's okay. They used to be really good. But I guess I shouldn't say that over live stream when we get DMCA. Anyways, but donuts, National Donut Day. When our friends were in town a couple weekends ago, I went to Sesame Donuts. You guys been to Sesame Donuts? It's over, the original location is over in Beaverton. They're good, like really good traditional donuts. None of this like, you know, I don't know. Yeah, and it's not voodoo donuts. But the story is that originally they started as a Dunkin's and they went independent. Well, how did I get started talking about donuts? Oh, donut day. So we're going to talk about what went on at Synod Assembly. If you do have anything to follow up on our discussion of the creeds, don't hesitate to bring it up, or I'll try and leave some space maybe at the end. But let's talk about Synod Assembly. So we brought 4 official voting representatives this year, 5 including me, but 4 congregational members, which is a privilege because we basically, the way that you calculate voting membership is it's about 1% of you get 1 vote per 100 members of your congregation. And about 10 years ago, Cheryl Ann and I went through and culled the membership rolls, which is to say that we went through and asked people if they still wanted to be members, especially those that had been inactive. And we dropped from 3 voting members to 2 voting members. But there were some resolutions that were passed in the intervening time, one of which was to allow additional voting members for people of color, one was to allow additional voting members for LGBTQ folks, and one was additional voting members for youth. And so we, as a congregation, can actually bring up to 5 voting members. We brought 4, so it was myself, well, plus me, 5 plus me, whatever. 4 plus me. So our voting members were Beth Lilly and Scott Stover. And then we had Scott's son Henry was there as our youth. And well, he's not intern, our seminarian Anthony Alvarez went as both person of color and LGBTQ person. I told him he was taking 2 spots. And he asked if he got 2 votes. I said, no, it doesn't work that way. And then Matt attended as a non-voting witness participant. It was really kind of funny because it was the bishop's election year, so they were extra tight on security, I guess, which was kind of a bummer. We had at least one other person that wanted to attend, but didn't register and had just kind of assumed you could, as in prior years, you could just attend as a spectator. But no, that was not a possibility. But Matt had registered ahead of time for that, so that worked out okay. But every time we had to vote on something, Matt would have to leave our table. He was a blue lanyard. We were all yellow lanyards.
It's like being on the judge stool or something.
Yeah, he had to go back and corner because he was a bad boy. That was pretty funny. But so Synod Assembly now is on a 3-year cycle, and so it is in person only on the 3rd year. The other 2 years it's virtual, and that was something that came about post-COVID, and there was a bunch of reasons, and I won't get into the full details because I got a lot to talk about. But primarily it saves congregations travel costs, and especially years where we don't have a lot of memorials or resolutions or a bishop's election, we can get it all done in one day over Zoom. And it works well for doing the business of the synod. It's not the same experience, obviously, but for me, once every 3 years is pretty good. And the other consequence of that is, and I think we're still going to rotate, but you only hit one spot every 9 years, right? In terms of Portland or Sun River or the coast or Eugene is where we used to do it. So anyway, we brought 4 plus me voting members. Henry was able to make it for Friday, and then he had a baseball tournament on Saturday, so he wasn't able to miss the bishop's election, which was kind of a bummer because I wanted him to see that process. So I'll start with that first. So Bishop Lori Larson Caesar ran again. You don't really run; you just put your name in the hat. And what's interesting, anybody here ever participated in a bishop's election? Oh wow, okay. I guess number one, your chances of being a Synod Assembly candidate are low, plus. So the way bishop's elections work in the ELCA is the first ballot is a blank ballot. So just because Bishop Lori was bishop does not mean that she gets her name special on the sheet. So the first ballot is a blank ballot. You write in whichever candidate you want, which means it's kind of hectic. It's a little bit chaotic because anybody can write anybody. And here's something that I learned, which I didn't know, is that you are eligible to be bishop of the Oregon Synod if you are an ordained rostered minister anywhere in the United States. So you do not have to be a member of the Oregon Synod, meaning that Bishop Elizabeth Eaton, she's not running again as presiding bishop, is eligible to be bishop of the Oregon Synod. She was one of the write-ins. She only got 1 vote. But it could be anybody anywhere, but then there's obviously clauses like you have to be reasonably. It has to be reasonable that you can communicate with them. They can't already be in a prior, bishopcy. And then, so what happens is the first one is write-ins, and the threshold for getting an election on the first ballot is 75%. It's really high. So generally speaking, you never get an election on the first ballot, even with a returning bishop. And we were so close, actually. The threshold for election was 167 votes, and Bishop Lori got 164 on the first ballot. I remember being a little bit frustrated because I thought it would be cool for Henry to see, because he was there on Friday, the first vote that played Friday. Anyways, and then the second ballot is all the candidates that were written in. Whether they got 1 vote or 20 votes or 163 votes, everybody appears in the second ballot. And then after the second ballot, the threshold is still 75% for the second ballot. She didn't get it on the second ballot either. Then it goes to the third ballot. And the thing that I left out is that if your name ends up on the ballot, there's a window where you can remove your name. Okay? And that window was like right after the business on Friday or early Saturday morning. Most of the folks left their name on the ballot going into the second ballot, and then by the third ballot that's not true at all. The second ballot was only Chris Kramer and Bishop Lori, and Bishop Lori had like 163 or 60 something, and Chris Kramer had like whatever was left over. It might have been bad names, but then by the third ballot, Bishop Lori won the election. So Bishop Lori Larson Caesar is serving another 6-year term for the Oregon Synod, which great. She's been a good bishop. No real complaints. So that's that. Any questions about the bishop's election?
I thought her comment with after she was elected, she got up there. She lets up. She's very charismatic. I mean, she just really has a way of presenting herself. You see the service when she's been there. She gets up there and she gives this big sigh. She says, in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking I was going to be able to take some time off, but that didn't happen. The Spirit moved me to do it again for the next 6 years. She was kind of about it.
Well, it's interesting. So by that second ballot, I think I'm misremembering the numbers because Chris actually had a pretty significant. I feel like he had 60 or 62 votes, something like that. So it was actually closer than it might appear. And so by that second ballot, you're presented with this interesting decision as a voter, which is, well, Bishop Lori has do I swing my vote for Lori to make the election happen, or do I stick it out? Enough people swung their vote for Lori that it was pretty.
Who was the other candidate?
Chris Kramer is a pastor over in Bend. I think he's at Nativity Lutheran in Bend. I know Chris fairly well. We bumped into each other along the way. He's a musician as well too. He's actually going to be at confirmation camp this summer when we're there, so I'm teaching with him on Wednesday. He's a good dude. I'd say he's a little bit more moderate, but again, these terms they're not political terms. This is not about partisanship. Socially speaking, I mean, it's the Oregon system, so we're all fairly progressive relative to other words, but he's a little bit more of a traditionalist when it comes to church, if that makes sense. Which I imagine appealed to some of our folks.
So what happens if the third vote, is it three?
You can go up to 5 ballots. So by the fifth, so what happens is the percentage lowers every time as well. The first 2 ballots are 75%. Third ballot is 65. Fourth ballot is 60. And the fifth ballot is 50-50. So whoever gets the simple majority at that point. However, so here was this is the piece I forgot to mention, is that because it's a bishop's election, a representative of the nation of churchwide has to be there to preside over the election, to guarantee a fair election. So the person who presided was the current vice president of the church council, the churchwide council, Imran Siddiqui. He is awesome. He is an extremely charming man. Fascinating story. He's actually originally. Do you remember where is he from originally?
He's from the United States, but he's of Middle Eastern origin.
I'm trying to remember what this Egyptian.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. Egyptian descent. He was born Muslim. Became an atheist, and then a Lutheran. And he said, I don't have enough time to tell you this story today. That's basically, he's like, you want to hear my story? Ask me at a different time. Very charming man, great sense of humor. My favorite bit was when he and the other parliamentarian I can't remember what they call them. There are 2 people that are guaranteeing the election. One is one of the pastors from the Oregon Synod. They were both reading off a bunch of stuff. Anyways, to the point where it gets, he's like, you get 3 minutes to make your choice. And he did the whole bit from Monty Python, Holy Grail, the Holy Hand Grenade. Anyway, so I had to be there. It was really sharp. It was really funny. He got a few laughs. Maybe hit the wrong demographic a little bit, but I thought it was really funny. So he won me over. Seems like a pretty cool dude. He's currently the vice president for the council that serves the entire ELCA. Pretty cool dude. And he's from Atlanta, wasn't it? Atlanta, yeah. Said Northwestern Lutheranism is different than Southeastern Lutheranism. Pretty funny. Okay, let's talk memorials and resolutions. I was going to throw them up on the screen, but I'm having ongoing tech issues with this new laptop that I need to fix. So I'll just, let me see if I can do it. Let me see if I can do it without breaking the live stream. Because it might be helpful for you to read and see. So there were 3 resolutions and 3 memorials, or 2 memorials, that were going before the assembly. There was a 6th one as well, too, that did not go before the assembly. They didn't really talk about why that was. Display settings. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, great. Okay, got the request. Okay. They're going to give me the option to.
Nope. No, that happened to me Saturday at the raindrops.
Oh, there it goes.
It popped in. Yeah.
Voila.
Well, hey, her name up there. Ah, there we go. Now it's.
Hey, all right. My stream still working?
I thought your computer was fast.
Here's the piso. It is fast. Well,
It's all.
I'll decorate it. There we go. Okay. So this is not necessarily to be presented. This is the order in which they're listed on the ballot or on the agenda. Because there is some strategy into how they present the resolutions. They tend to try to do the more. I think they try to tend to do the more controversial ones in the middle of the day on Saturday, after everybody is appropriately caffeinated and we've gotten most of the business out of the way. This one is, I'll read it for as well, a response to Executive Order 14169, reevaluating and realigning the United States foreign aid in the Oregon Synod. So what this specifically refers to, and I won't read all the whereases, is addressing the Trump administration order shutting down USAID. And not only shutting down USAID, but cutting off funding from immigration services, including Lutheran Community Services Northwest, which is why this is relevant to us. Now, a little bit of history. LCS Northwest and others filed a suit against the Trump administration and won. So theoretically, the administration should be restoring some funds that were already promised by the Biden administration. That hasn't happened yet. And honestly, there's not really any good chance as to whether or not they're actually going to end up, whether the Trump administration is actually going to comply with the judge's orders. Although we're starting to see some movement. Omar Garcia ended up coming back. So I think they're just dragging their heels out of pure pettiness. That's my opinion. So this was not necessarily, so you know the difference between a resolution and a memorial? A resolution is something that we are resolving to do as a synod. A memorial is something that we're memorializing to churchwide. So it's something that we're for, that we want to send to the churchwide to put in front of the entire ELC. I don't know why we use that specific language. I'm sure there's history to it, but I'm not actually familiar with that. So I'm going to scroll down so you can see the important parts. There's a lot of whereases which are referring specifically to the decision or to the things that the Trump administration did.
So do all resolutions start off as memorials?
Nope. In fact, you could argue that it's mostly the other way around, where it starts local and then eventually we might encourage the nationwide body to do it. Does that make sense? It's the particulars of, are we resolving to do this as the Oregon Synod? And again, we cannot make our congregations do anything. As we heard several times on Saturday, we can resolve to do something with the Synod, but it's nothing more than guidance or suggestion. Okay? We can't force our congregations to do anything they don't want to do. We can tell them things they can't do. The resolve is essentially what we're resolving to do. It's the action. So I'll read that real quick. That in 90 days from adoption of this resolution, the Oregon Synod Council will form a task force consisting of volunteers, willing local leaders, and an unsigned occasional Synod staff member, and an assigned KDK. This team will consult with organizing partners and subject matter experts like Lutheran Community Services Northwest and engage in a listening season prior to the next Synod Assembly in 2026. During that time, the task force will discover and prioritize the ongoing needs and continued support for immigration and disaster relief services in the Oregon Synod, and be a further result. You can have a bunch of results, right? So these are all the action items. And be a further result that the task force will prepare a second resolution with concrete action plans to be presented at the 2026 Oregon Synod Assembly. The task force will also make periodic progress reports to the Oregon Synod Council. And this was brought primarily by Creator Lutheran Church. Pastor Emily Binja is the new pastor there. I have to be very careful. I'm pretty sure Emily's family is from Kenya, but I don't want to seem like the person that confuses Kenya with
They're from the Congo.
Congo. 5 letters, starts with, two vowels. Thank you, Matt, for correcting me on that. She's from the Congo. Charming and wonderful pastor. I had coffee with her some time ago. I need to catch up with her again. So, Creator Lutheran brought this one, but you notice that there's a bunch of signatories on there, other pastors and other people. And there are rules for how many signatures you need to have, or change something, right? So it's not like they say, no, you didn't dot an I to that. The Synod team works with you pretty well. So just to summarize this one really quick, and this one had very little conversation, it passed pretty much unanimously, is that it's resolving to form a team to figure out how we can support LCS Northwest absent the funding that they're supposed to be getting from the federal administration. And the additional resolve was then to prepare something for us to vote on in 2026 in support of LCS Northwest. Again, pretty simple, but a lot of language to get there, which is kind of the default for these. Any questions on that? And by the way, if you've never been to a Synod Assembly, the way that it works is it's Robert's Rules of Order, which Anthony can speak to later. It's Robert's Rules of Order, which Imran Siddiqui had a great joke. It was like, the first time I ran into this, he's like, who's Robert? Why does he have so many rules? I thought that was pretty funny. You all are entirely too happy about this stuff. Anyways, so it's the same as in a church council meeting. To get a resolution passed, there's the resolution is brought to the floor, a motion is made to present the resolution, usually by the creators of the resolution. Then you get a second, usually get about 300 seconds. Everybody in the room is like, whatever, and they just pick somebody at random, sure. And then it opens up discussion. There are a lot of rules about amending the resolution, whether you vote on the amendment before voting on the resolution. It gets very complicated very quickly depending on whether changes need to be made to the amendment, which is why they do a lot of work in preparing these before they're brought to the floor, because it takes a lot of time to vote on the amendment and the amendment to the amendment before you can vote on the resolution. It gets really complicated. There are two microphones, a red microphone and a green microphone. Green is speaking in favor of the resolution or the amendment. Red is speaking against it, and you bring your card. So all the voting members have green card, red card, white card. If you bring a green card, you're going to give testimony in favor. If you bring a red card, you're speaking against. If you bring a white card, it usually means that you have a question about the amendment, or about the resolution, or you want to make an amendment changing the language of. And I think we only had one resolution where we amended it, the language in particular. This one had, and the other rule is you have 3 people in a row that speak in favor or against an amendment. 3 people in a row who speak in favor of the amendment goes straight to vote. So you don't just have 25 people saying the same thing over and over again. But otherwise, it goes back and forth. One person for, one person against, etc., etc. At any point, somebody can come up with their white card and call the question, saying, I think we've had enough conversation. Then you vote as to whether you want to vote. You vote as to whether you want to vote, essentially. It gets really complicated, but there's a reason behind it. So any questions about this one? Okay.
Well, if we're going to encourage the government to give money again like they were before.
We're not. That's not the resolution. So the whereas is we're saying because of these things that have happened, and this is a good question, Pat, because this is one of the things that there was some confusion on, is that we're not actually telling the government anything. This was saying because of these things that have happened that affect the funding for LCS Northwest, we are resolving as a synod to figure out ways to support LCS Northwest.
And if we do that, don't we as a congregation have to donate
Nope.
money to that?
No, we don't have to do
We have
anything.
to put our money where our mouth is?
Oh, you're saying from a moral standpoint. Yes. Yes, I'm with you, Pat. I think that we should support Lutheran Community Services in Northwest, and we do. We send some of we could do more. And so actually that's what this team is going to do, is they're going to figure out a way that the congregation of the Oregon Synod can better support LCS Northwest. That's a good question. But again, we don't have to do anything. No congregation.
Well, but
I understand. It's semantic. Yeah. But it came up specifically for this resolution was actually one of the more contested ones. And there was there's a bunch of whereas here, and where we had to amend the resolution was specifically in the first one. In his inaugural sermon, Luke 4, Jesus invokes the Jubilee tradition in which Yahweh affirms the land is mine for his strength. That quote from Leviticus 25. Chris Kramer brought forward an amendment, which I whispered to Anthony right then, or to Scott maybe, saying this is inappropriate. Using Yahweh in our public language is not good because Jews don't speak the Tetragrammaton, that you don't say the name of God, you say Adonai. since this is a public document that will be published, the amendment was, let's change that language. Here's the funny thing is that they've changed it from Yahweh, and they asked the amendment proposer, Chris, what would you change it to? And he said, well, let's change it to the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, because the NRSV translated the Tetragrammaton as Lord. Then somebody else came up and said, well, isn't that kind of gender-specific language? Which I thought was a little bit, but whatever. And so they said, what do you want to change it to? And they're like, let's just change it to God. And then Chris got back up again and says, I support the amendment to the amendment. Anyways, it was really funny because I texted my friends Anna and Ryan, and the text was essentially, they're the JPS scholars, and they said, I brought this up, and we finally settled on God. And they're like, yes, we just call God God. Yes, absolutely. So this specifically is out of a project that was started in the Oregon Synod by some congregations. And I'm not going to do justice to this because it's fairly complicated, and I think this was. I was 50-50 on this one for my own reasons. You might remember Sarah Gross Samuelson. She did some work with us here. She's pastor at Gethsemane over near Gresham in Portland. And so this was brought by a mixture of Gethsemane folks and Creator folks and some folks in the Together Lab. Good luck, choir folks. I'll boil it down for you. It's encouraging congregations in the Oregon Synod to do sacred land stories. Again, this is language that might be unfamiliar, which is essentially to figure out who lived on your land before you did. Does that make sense? We've done some of that. Voila, right? We've already had a similar conversation. But it's essentially encouraging. We can't tell congregations to do anything. It's encouraging congregations to use this as a tool for figuring out the history of their congregation, as a means for figuring out what the congregation should do moving forward, especially with a lot of congregations that are some significant number of congregations that are on that line of should we close or should we continue on? And what do we do with our land and property after the fact? And it's funny, Matt had a comment, or maybe it was Scott, or Matt. Somebody had a comment that, no, it was Scott, that essentially said, this is just another way of figuring out the mission of the congregations. Yes, exactly. But this one had some conversation around it, particularly because of the misunderstanding around whether or not we can tell our congregations to do anything. And no, you can't tell your congregation. You can encourage, that's what a resolution does, but it does not mandate this. Because one of the rural congregations was like, well, we can't afford to hire somebody to come do this. I said, no, you don't have to do this.
Well, so they don't look at a congregation and how many people are in it and decide that because we're X number of people, we hopefully will be donating a certain amount of money.
With regards to which?
Well, I'm just thinking that we should give more.
Sure.
But is there any encouragement because of however many people we have, how much more we should give?
And you've identified one of the challenges in creating any resolution is that just because we pass a resolution doesn't necessarily guarantee that anything concrete is going to happen. So like in the case of the first resolution that I talked about, all it did was form a committee. It formed a team to do some research. Whether anything actionable comes out of that is really dependent upon the team that's formed and basically on the energy that the synod puts into it. So a lot of this is it's almost self-selecting in a lot of ways, is that, a resolution might pass. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to get anything out of it, So this is one of the things that is tough to communicate to voting members, especially if they haven't been informed when they get there, is that you might not necessarily agree with that specific issue. The question is whether it's going to affect your congregation or not, and by and large, probably won't. You get to choose that.
So if a pastor agrees that it's a good thing, would he or she be apt to encourage the congregation in that respect?
That's the assumption. And not only that, the members of the congregation who were present as voting members would encourage, essentially encourage the council to encourage the congregation. Yeah, the idea is that all of these things that especially the resolutions that are passed, are things that I hope to, I mean that's why I'm bringing them before you now, but incorporate. So here's a concrete example of this. We're talking about sacred land story. We as a congregation talk significantly about what do we do with that. All right, and a way of facilitating that conversation is to discuss what was that land before we were here. Not just in terms of who were the native people that lived here as a way of kind of like provoking our thoughts and our imaginations, but also, one of the stories that I hear about that parking lot is that it was a swamp. That when we first paved that thing, they had to deal with water all the time. And again, it's a way of understanding the history of the property that our churches sit upon, but it can have concrete effects. Does that make sense? I mean, this one is, I already changed, but the other one, that wasn't encouraging us to give any money. It was encouraging congregations to participate in this congregational action.
One thing that we do every year is, as a council, we talk about our benevolence.
Yes.
'Cause
Oh, we
there's
raised
a
the
lot-
benevolence.
And we actually we had a couple of benevolences that we said, well, let's move that, and we're giving more to the synod as of this year.
We increased our benevolence to the synod by 11% this year,
So,
which was, we went from 7,000 to 7,800.
yeah, so
There's a lot of ways to give.
Yes.
there is.
Yeah, absolutely. And with regards to LCS Northwest, I've had a pretty tight relation. I've gone to their fundraisers for years on end. I fully support the work that LCS Northwest does. I think it's a vital and important part of what our country does in being a haven for refugees and immigrants. So I would hope that as a congregation this would be something that we support. And I look forward to hearing back from that committee in 2026. Doesn't mean we have to wait that long, but I look forward to hearing in ways that we can more concretely and better support the work that they do.
I think another thing about this land back thing, Jesse, is that, and I'm gonna get a hold of the synod about this, is that it seems to me that the ELCA and the Oregon Synod in particular could partner up with some of these nonprofits that are already in the
Yeah.
business. And I had a real personal
You have experience.
thing going on
Yeah.
here with this, just this week. The organization I used to work for, Western Rivers Conservancy, about 20 years ago, had bought 47,000 acres of land in Northern California to benefit the Yurok tribe, who were the ancestral owners of these, not the owners, but the users of this property. It's a place called Blue Creek, which is a tributary of the Klamath River. Big time salmon habitat and stuff. And when I was at Western Rivers, my job was to put together the forest management plan for that property, which is actually the last thing I did. I was so fed up with working on it that I finally retired. But anyway, this week, they finally finished the transfer from the lands from Western Rivers over to the Yurok tribe. And it's the largest land back project in California history.
Wow.
So, my thought is that this is the kind of thing that the ELCA could partner up with organizations like Western Rivers Conservancy and actually get some concrete stuff done.
Yeah.
Other than just lobby
Yeah.
for voter stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a great story, and I'm going to get a hold of Sarah Lucey and
Yeah.
talk to her about it.
And this is one of the realities of resolutions is they're all crowdsourced, right? Is a congregation has an idea, they bring it before the floor, and a lot of times what we end up voting on is not necessarily the meat of the resolution, it's on the again, especially in 2025, the political identity of the resolution. Does that make sense? And a lot of folks don't even I don't know if they understand they're voting as to whether they support that idea or not. So this is a good example. Well, not this one, the next one. Let me come back to the trans rights one. This is an important one that I passed the flying colors. I'll show you the one that ended up having the most hotly debated. So this was a memorial. So again, this isn't a resolution that the Oregon Synod is doing. It's a memorial that we're sending to churchwide for the churchwide endowments. So this is a memorial for the occupation and recognition of the Palestinian statehood and the United Nations. So pay attention to the language. And I'm gonna, same thing, I'm gonna, well, do I wanna read? Well, I'll read a couple of the whereases. So, whereas the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in 2005 established the initiative, and notice the dates, 2005, Peace Not Walls, Stand for Justice in the Holy Land, recently named SUMA. I don't understand that acronym, they didn't really explain that, for justice in Palestine and Israel. And whereas the ELCA in its 2017 social message on human rights, etc., 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 and whereas the United Nations in its resolutions numbers, blah, 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 declared that the state of Israel's military occupation of the West Bank is illegal according to international law, and whereas Israel's ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories, the West Bank and Gaza, continues to endanger the security, etc., 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 and whereas the illegal occupation, etc., 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 I apologize, I'm going through this. Then it is resolved that the Oregon Synod memorialize the 2025 churchwide assembly of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to urge the presiding bishop to direct a letter to the President of the United States, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, calling for U.S. action, to take an action in support policy that would support the recognition of Palestine as a legitimate state in the United Nations, as other United Nations members states have already done, and be it further resolved that the Oregon Synod Assembly memorialize, so again, sending something to state or the churchwide, to urge the presiding bishop, saying, to take its action in support of policy that will support the human rights of all Palestinians and Israelis, by calling for an end to the illegal occupation of West Bank and Gaza, and further resolve that the Oregon Synod memorialize, etc., to encourage its members to recommit to advocate for the human rights, justice, and peace for all Palestinians in Israel. You can see the people that sign on. This memorial is essentially calling on the church to do what it already did. So they notice again, they reference two different dates there. One was 2005, and the other is 2017, and said that at these points in history, the ELCA made statements encouraging what we talked, this ending an occupation in Gaza and West Bank, both through the what was it, 2005, the initiative that they established, and then in the social statement on human rights. Those are two examples of where we've already, as the ELCA, committed to this messaging. Then, referencing the United Nations decision, said, listen, here's the action the United Nations is taking. So what this resolution is, or memorial, this memorial is resolving to do is encourage the ELCA to do what it already did, which is to reiterate the language that we said in 2005 and 2017. And this is a particular example of where, again, it's hard to do on the day because we're assuming that all the voting members have read the memorials and resolutions, which many have not. And we're assuming that folks understand the language of the memorials and resolutions, which I'm not sure I do all the time, is that this one actually ended up being hotly debated, and it turned into, are we for the Palestinians or for the Israelis, which was really unfortunate, because I feel like this is actually a very well-written memorial, and that it's essentially saying, we're not trying to make waves here. This isn't about getting our name in the news. This is encouraging our national body to continue the work it has been doing, and to reiterate, to use our public voice in a way to call on our government to do the work that it claims it was going to do. Which, and I was actually, this is the first time I've ever done it. I actually went up to the mic to speak in favor of the amendment, but specifically to correct a couple of misinformations that were spoken by one of the people who were speaking against it, and I'm not going to get into the details of it. But also, I wanted to quote Bonhoeffer, which is to say that one of our roles as church with regards to the state is to use our voice to make sure that the state does what it says it's going to do, right? Which is to say that, make sure your walk matches your talk, okay? Again, just the nature of the beast is that the conversation ended up being a lot of, here's why I support the Palestinians, or here's why I support the Israelis, which is really more indicative of where we're at as a society than necessarily, I think, a condemnation or a critique of our synod. At the end of the day, it passed There were some no's, though, and that was probably, I think, the only amendment, or the only resolution or memorial that had no votes in it. And you can see where even though our assembly, our synod, is one that, from external perspective, might appear rather homogeneous in terms of political affiliation, it is not true. We have different views on different points. So at the end, even though I think it caused any amount of dissension causes anxiety for folks, this at least shows how healthy our process is, if that makes sense. Any questions about this one? I want to get through one more, and then I asked Anthony to be here specifically so he could speak to the workshop that he attended, and I want to give him at least 5 to 10 minutes to talk about that. 5 minutes, okay. Any questions about this one? Is it clear what that, again, the language, there's a lot, parsing the whereases and the resolve can get a little bit, because again, the whereases are basically making the case for why we should resolve to do that, okay? And so the resolution essentially is encouraging churchwide to reiterate what they already said to this administration, right? Even though we've done it to prior administration. Well, I guess it would have been the Trump administration in 2017. 2005 was George W. Bush.
Well, it seems like your summary of telling us that they're reiterating this, or do it, say the same message again. There's a lot of language here to just say that.
I know. And unfortunately, that's just kind of, it's the form of this thing. And again, I am summarizing to a certain extent, but notice that it's the same, for each of the resolve, it's actually the same language over and over, making different points. So the same language is that the Oregon Synod Assembly memorialized the 2025 Churchwide Assembly of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to urge the presiding bishop to send a letter to President of the United States, President of the Senate, and Speaker of the House. And then, again, same thing, further resolve to urge, send, two different messages. One is asking them to recognize Palestine as a state, which the LCA already spoke to in 2005. The other is to encourage the end of the occupation of West Bank and Gaza, which also is, the West Bank is not Gaza, by the way. The West Bank is literally the West Bank of the Jordan. We talked about that. I'm not going to get into the details. That was another thing that people misunderstood, is because Gaza is in the news. It was all Gaza, Hamas, Gaza, Netanyahu, Gaza, and it was like, there are other Palestinians. Not that we should forget the plight of the Gazans, but there are other Palestinians that the occupation part specifically applies to. And the last resolution is encouraging congregations to recommit to advocate for human rights, justice, and peace for all Palestinians. That is an encouragement, not a command. So it's the same thing with any resolution or memorial. We can encourage, but we can't tell our congregations what. And that, at the end of the day, is the only resolution that I felt was maybe a little bit, not controversial, it might cause some controversy. Because again, the other two are essentially saying, can the bishop reiterate what we already said to the U.S. and the United Nations? This one could be construed as quote unquote picking a side. But again, I felt the language was really good. Peace for all Palestinians and Israelis, right? So it's not choosing a side, it's encouraging them to conflict. Does that make sense? And again, it's just the issue with the way that this process works. Is it perfect? No. Is this actually going to do anything? Who knows? We'll see. When it's in a couple of weeks here, the churchwide gathering happens. We'll get to see what happens with this specific memorial and whether the churchwide chooses to vote on it, because they can also choose not to vote on memorials that are sent from the official synod. I want to just hit the last two. I'll speak to in 2 minutes because it's a very practical matter. This is brought by, I forget his name already. It's not in here. Why don't they have it? This is brought by a guy that's over at Westland Lutheran, Jack Mandeville. There it is. Jack Mandeville, who is currently going through the deacon process, working at Westland. And this resolution is simply, or memorial, sorry, is simply to encourage the LCA to produce more educational materials as to the deacon process. That's all it was. So when he started the deacon process, he said, I found a bunch of stuff on both deacon and diaconal ministry from from 20 years ago, but one of the things that happened was we merged those two identities into just deacons. We used to have diaconal ministers and deacons, now we just have deacons. And after that, they didn't publish any new information detailing what that even means. And so he was saying, hey, this is very important for me because I'm going through this process, which is ordination to word and service, in contrast with, as me, I'm ordination to word and sacrament. We have a deacon that works for us. Linda Smith is a deacon. She's ordained to word and service. He just said, there's not enough information out there. I couldn't find anything when I started. Can the ELCA and its publishing wing, Oxford Purchase, please produce more information? And so we're memorializing that to the church-wide, and he even includes some costs, which I think is a non-issue. It's the church's job to figure out how they're going to pay for it, not the resolutions. Any questions on that one? Oh, hold on. Hello.
Come on in.
Come on in, Denver. What did you
Tell
make
them
today?
first what you made.
Are you willing to hold the mic?
Do you want me to hold it for you?
Or yeah.
Okay, go. That's it. And what does the one sock represent?
It represents the Holy Spirit.
And what are we celebrating today?
The Holy Spirit. Pentecost.
Okay, so I'm going to trade with you. And you are going to read. Okay, want to hold up my hands? The hand? Everybody hold up. One. What is one?
One. The disciples were gathered in one place.
Two.
Two. Words. The Holy Spirit. The disciples received the gift of the Holy Spirit. Three. In the Trinity, Father, Son, and now the Holy Spirit. Four. Surprising events. Strong winds, amazing waves, flames of fire, different languages.
And then five.
5 times 10 equals 50. We celebrate the day 50 days after Easter.
What is left side?
Thank you, Sandra. Can I just say, you read extremely well. Great job. It's very impressive.
And
Very
for
impressive.
almost like 2.5 years.
Good Lord.
September, do you want to take a quick
Keep reading.
lap around so we can see
Yeah,
what's
go do your home run shot with your
Hold it up like this.
the wind sock. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. September, would you be willing to participate in the procession of fire at the beginning of the service today?
Sure.
Okay, all you have to do is do this. At the beginning
Can
of the
I
service.
read my paper up there?
Yeah, actually, I'll have you do it before the sermon, if that's okay.
You want to do that? Max will go up with you.
That'd be great.
Okay, you won't. Okay, we have-
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, guys. So word of service, more materials, please. And then the final one was affirming and supporting transgender and non-binary individuals. And I'm going to skip straight to the results so that I can give Anthony a chance to present as well too. Therefore, be it resolved that the Oregon Synod Assembly reaffirm its commitment to protect the civil rights of all people, which is the 2017 social statement that came out, including transgender and non-binary individuals, and continue to stand in opposition to any and all attempts to legalize discrimination done in the name of religious freedom. And be it further resolved that the Oregon Synod Bishop's Office will share educational resources with its congregations and ministry sites so that they are better prepared to support transgender and non-binary individuals. And be it further resolved that the Oregon Synod Bishop's Office will have man, woman, and non-binary as minimum gender options when it is needed for forums, and encourage congregations and ministry to do likewise. And be it further resolved that the Oregon Synod Bishop's Office, when reserving spaces for synodical events, will strive to make venues that include public bathrooms that are all gender or gender neutral, and encourage congregations and ministries to do the same. And you can see a long list of the folks that were signatories on this. And this one actually did not get really much, didn't get any debate. There were many folks speaking in affirmation of it. And Emerson Remmers, who presented the memorial resolution, spoke to it at the beginning, did a very very fantastic job, I thought, and that was one of the reasons that it didn't get debate per se, is they just brought up that what it feels like to be a trans person in 2025 and to know that the administration is creating legislation specifically targeting you. And that was something that really resonated with me, because I know there were a lot of people in that room who might not necessarily understand. I know that when we went through our RIC process, this was one of the things that we got stuck on was the concepts of transgenderism, pronouns obviously being something that can cause confusion for folks in this new world that we live in. And Pastor Reimers basically just said, here's the deal, it's a scary time to be a trans person, and we're just asking for the Synod support. And so essentially what it does is it asks congregations for a couple of specific things, which is, continue to pray for us and be in support of us. But then also, here are a couple of practical things. Next time they have a Synod assembly, and they did have gender neutral bathrooms, make sure that they have their bathrooms so we don't have to deal with, men and women, etc. Make sure our forums have male, female, non-binary as options, which by and large the Synod has been good about doing, and encouraging congregations to do the same. I'm proud to announce that we do have a gender neutral bathroom, which is also a handicap bathroom. So, yeah. Any questions about this? Anthony attended a workshop on Friday. He was a good attendee.
Hi, good morning. So that was my first Synod assembly, and I felt like it was a 3-day-long city church council meeting with 300 people speaking at the same time. And they took the coffee away right after lunch, which was wrong, and I wrote a strongly worded letter to our bishop about that one. I did go to the workshop. It was about being a gender inclusive, not just a welcoming congregation, but an affirming congregation, and it was put on by Shane, who is one of the speakers to this resolution. We are a great church. I've been here for not quite 6 months now, and I feel like we are one of the most welcoming churches I've ever attended. I've had some friends come when I preached a couple weeks ago, and they have been saying how welcoming everybody has been and how much they enjoy being here. We are a welcoming church. I know we are an RIC congregation, but being welcoming is different than being affirming. And the workshop was, how can we as a congregation or as a wider church be affirming to all people? And how that translates is conversations we're going to have. What does that mean? What does it mean to be affirmed versus welcomed? It's easy to welcome somebody. And the way I attend it is, I can have somebody come over to my house, welcome them for dinner, make them a plate, make them feel welcome. But it's very different for somebody to come to my house and feel like they're home. And they're not just welcome, but this is their home, this is their safe place, this is where they get to hold space and exist as a fully loved child of Christ. And that's our mission. That was the mission of this workshop, is to how churches get to a space where people across the board not only feel welcome, but feel like they are home, they are affirmed to be wholeheartedly themselves, and that we invite into our family and make them feel like they are part of. And that's the conversation we want to have going forward. There's no resolution to that. They're not telling the congregation. That was just the conversation we started, which was really neat because there was people who we got to speak with in my small group, ran the gamut from more conservative churches who are just barely starting to go through the RIC process to congregations who have already gone through the RIC process, and I feel like we're on the latter side. We're very welcoming, and it's just how do we continue to push forward that effort. So,
thank you, Anthony. And in fact, just to update you a little bit on Anthony's process, he's going to PLTS in the fall. He just set up a GoFundMe page to help pay for some of the extra costs. Anthony is the recipient of the Fund for Leaders Scholarship, meaning that he's going to get most of his expenses paid for, so congratulations on that. He's also, again, fingers crossed, assuming that his candidacy committee lets him do his contextual education here at Milwaukee Lutheran. And that is usually like the second year, something like that.
but yes.
Yeah.
Second semester.
Second semester. meaning that we get free labor out of them.
I do windows and floors.
But yes, yeah. But also, one of the things, and he and I haven't talked about this yet, so I apologize for throwing him under the bus. I think one of the things that it would be great is potentially to have Anthony lead us through a process, and maybe as part of this class, on how can we be more affirming in addition to involvement. So.
You know, another thing about that, you guys think about this, as you're going through your process of moving toward ordination and such, it's like every 6 months, give us kind of an update on what that entails, because, you know, I mean, we know you went through the seminary, but we don't have the step-by-step understanding of all the things that happen.
It's way different. Anthony's experience is going to be a lot different than mine was. Mine was very much a 4-year college, stereotypical university experience. So I did 2 years, then a year of internship, and then a 4th year. Anthony is going to be primarily online with 2, and this is, by the way that every seminary is now, including Luther, where I went. Very few students participate in person, and in fact, it's a high likelihood that Luther Seminary is going to be selling its campus in the next couple of years, moving entirely to online education. It's a long story. So Anthony is going to be doing, he's hoping for a 3-year or less process. We'll see.
I'm here.
The benefit is that he can continue to work, right? Continue to live in Portland and do most of the education online. But you have two weeks out of the year that you.
It comes out to about 3, but yeah.
Yeah.
In Berkeley.
Yeah, in person in San Francisco, in Berkeley. So, and then he'll still do a form of CPE and an internship, and that's going to be one of the ones that are going to be tough to figure out. But we'll get there. So, do you have a question?
What exactly is contextual education as opposed to being an intern?
So the contextual ministry is you get free labor from me. I'm committed here to 10-ish hours a week or whatever is beck and call.
So it's the same task?
Whatever, yes.
So internship is full time.
Yeah.
So
It's
internship.
a paid internship.
Yeah, it is a paid
There are
internship.
congregations who have worked with the Synod who say, we have a position, and if you're outside of your area, they usually provide housing and a small stipend to live on.
Con Ed, as we refer to it, is a way of kind of like easing into that.
Yeah.
So when I did it, mine really was, free labor. Was I taught confirmation for the pastor that I was, you trust me with this? Okay. I got to do the things that she didn't want to do, which was okay. It was fine. I hope to give Anthony a little bit more of a holistic experience. So he's preaching again this coming Sunday because I'm going to be gone. So, which is, I didn't get to do until when my internship was, I think, the first time that I got to preach in the congregation, which was kind of a bummer. But then again, when he officially starts his continuing education, I hope to incorporate him in Bible studies. He's already participating in the Bible study at Shirley Myers on Tuesdays. All different aspects of church life for his own benefit, and additionally, he can participate in church council meetings and all the things that by the time he goes on internship, he has a sense for how this all functions. And I better quit so I can get to worship time. But just to say, that was for me one of the great deficiencies when I graduated, even after my 4-year process, was I didn't necessarily have anybody that explained to me the ins and the outs of not all church councils are the same, and not all churches want their pastors to be the chief administrator, and here's what that looks like. Here's how you manage money as a congregation. Here's how you do capital campaigns. None of those things. I had none of that. Luckily, I had a good senior pastor in Fort Wayne that kind of showed me the ropes a little bit.
And after talking to some of the other candidates, I want to let you know that I'm very lucky to be here with Pastor Jesse, who's willing to sit down with me and talk about the nitty-gritty of how the church works. Because a lot of people are like, they just put me confirmation and stuck me in the corner.
Anthony's making this sound like this is a gift that I'm giving you. In reality, I get to rant to Anthony for an hour and a half over coffee. It's all for me. Anyways, thank you, folks. No adult ed next week, right? I'm gone. Nothing on the 15th. We'll be back again on the 22nd. We're starting our new study on civics.